Order. We start with questions. Secretary of State for Scotland, Dr Scott Arthur.
Question number 1, Mr Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I know members across the House will join me in paying a respect to His Holiness Pope Francis. I offer my sincere condolences to Scotland's Catholic community, who have this Easter lost a much-loved and compassionate leader. Just before recess, Mr Speaker, I had the privilege of leading the UK Government delegation to Washington DC and then on to Tartan Week in New York. This trip was a key part of my drive to promote Brand Scotland around the world, to boost economic growth and create jobs here at home. And finally, Mr Speaker, to you, to members across this House and to Scotland's closest and most important neighbours, happy St George's Day.
Dr Scott Arthur.
And I better answer these questions well, Mr Speaker, of course. It's too excited about St George's Day, so I am, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, we should all be proud of Scotland's universities, of the contribution they make to Scotland's public life and their reputation as the best in the world. But 18 years of the SNP have left some of those proud institutions in dire straits. Job cuts and course closures are the inevitable product of the SNP's decision to deliver a 22% real terms cut to Scottish student funding since 2013. Scotland's universities, their staff and their students all need a Scottish Government with a proper plan to turn this crisis around. They need a new direction with Scottish Labour.
Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for his answer and also his comments about the Pope. And I make my response within the context of my register of interest and also note my membership of the UCU. So the university sector in Scotland has never been in a worse state. It's in a state of crisis. There's job losses, both compulsory and voluntary, being contemplated right across the whole sector in Scotland. And it's young Scots that are paying the price. To balance the books, the Scottish Government is limiting the number of young Scots who can go to university, and this is forcing universities to more and more rely on recruitment of students from overseas. And I have to be clear about what this means. It means that often Scots are sitting at home unable to access a place, whereas students from overseas with lower qualifications are getting that place. And does the Secretary of State agree with me that Scotland's young people must be supported and the university sector must be fully funded in Scotland?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I also thank my honourable friend for this question, but also for what he does to support higher education in Scotland. Thanks to the SNP's higher education financial crisis, too many Scottish students, as he says, are missing out on places. Labour is committed to ensuring that Scottish students of all backgrounds can access university, and that can only be achieved with a new funding settlement which protects our world-leading universities and gives any Scottish student who wants to pursue the university route the opportunity to do so. I'm proud to have made it from Western Hills Education Centre in the Western Hills scheme to Edinburgh University, but that story is becoming all too rare under this SNP government. It's time for a new direction for Scottish universities.
Secretary of State Andrew Marr.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Can I associate myself with the remarks on the passing of His Holiness Pope Francis, and also wish all those not fortunate enough to be born north of Hadrian's Wall a very happy St George's Day. Now, whilst not quite a graduate of Aberdeen University, the Secretary of State is, like me, a beneficiary of a Scottish university education. Scotland has some of the finest and most respected higher education establishments in the world, but as we've seen last week at Aberdeen, in warnings from the University of Edinburgh, and most starkly at the University of Dundee, where over 600 jobs are being shed to make emergency savings, the current funding model overseen by the SNP is failing our institutions and our young people. On that, I know we agree, but will he also acknowledge the devastating impact on Scottish university budgets of his own government's national insurance increase, adding £45 million to their salary bills, or will he continue to defend this job-killing anti-growth tax on workers?
Well, Mr Speaker, the Shadow Secretary of State is defending the SNP's dreadful record with higher education in Scotland. It's quite clear from the University of Edinburgh, in terms of their principal, Peter Matheson, that the problems at University of Edinburgh that they're having to deal with is a cause of underfunding of students from Scotland, and they've had to balance the books by an ever-increasing number of international students. The number of international students at Edinburgh University, as an example, is still going up, but isn't going up as high as projected, and that is the major cause of the financial problems at Scottish universities, and the Conservatives do well not to hide behind the SNP and support them in that process.
Christine Jardine, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I associate myself with the comments that the Secretary of State made about the death of Pope Francis. I also agree with much of what has been said, in a rare consensus with both the Honourable Member for Edinburgh South West and the Scottish spokesperson for the Scottish Conservatives. Many universities are extremely concerned about the funding situation. Many of my constituents who are employees or have children at Scottish universities are concerned, particularly following the news of the 600 job cuts at Dundee University. And I have spoken to the principal of Edinburgh University, and he is also concerned about the funding model. It's the funding model in Scotland which is failing everyone. So can he please tell us where he is going to discuss with the Scottish Government how they can make changes, put pressure on them to do so. But I also have to say that the national insurance changes are not helpful. So it would be helpful to Scottish education if we could have some changes there as well.
Well, Mr Speaker, the key thing here, and I think the Honourable Lady is slightly contradictory in her question, because on the one hand, she doesn't like the national insurance contribution increases, which has given the Scottish Government a £4.9 billion boost, the highest settlement in the history of devolution. That money should be going to the front line in terms of higher education, and it's not. But on the other hand, she talks about a more generous funding settlement for our universities. She can't have it both ways. So the funding model does have to change, and this Scotland office are in touch with all our principals at the university to see how we can work through this. But this is a problem with funding of higher education as a result of SNP policies in the Scottish Government.
Stephen Gaffney.
Speaker, can I associate myself with comments on the devastating loss of Pope Francis, and in particular the compassion that he showed to the most vulnerable in our society, and on a happier note to wish all friends and family a very happy St George's Day. I'll note my register of interest as well, Mr Speaker, in terms of higher education. He will know that the biggest financial impact on higher education in Scotland have been Westminster policies, which is why the sector in the UK is facing some challenges. National insurance increase, Brexit, that I know he passionately opposed or used to anyway, and the hostile environment. Now, Mr Speaker, Labour found common ground with Michael Gove in terms of sticking him into the House of Lords, but they also found common ground with him about his commitment to decentralising migration. That's had a particular impact on the higher education sector, not least in Dundee. That's been the biggest financial hit. Can you let us know what progress he's made on that commitment by Scottish Labour?
Mr Speaker, can I also just say to the honourable gentleman our deepest condolences to the loss of Christina McKelvey. I think that's the first time we've had Scottish questions to you and all your SNP colleagues. Mr Speaker, again, the honourable gentleman and his colleagues in the SNP voted against the budget, which delivered £4.9 billion extra for public services in Scotland. Some of that should have gone to frontline services, including making sure that our higher education sector was funded properly in the Scottish context. The SNP are very good at blaming everybody else for powers that don't belong to them, but actually what they should be doing is getting a mirror. And the only thing they have increased in the last 7 days in terms of using the budget that was given to them is £20,000 increases in the salaries for Scottish Government ministers who've all singularly failed.
Stephen Gaffney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State about his kind remarks about the sad loss of Christina McKelvey, and also note the kind remarks that were made by the Prime Minister as well, and the whole party is grateful for those. Now, since the Labour Government doesn't want to talk about their commitments, let me help them out a little bit. We have time on Friday, this Friday, to discuss Scotland's particular migration needs, something backed by the care sector, the hospitality sector, tourism, and we know how crucial internationalisation is for the higher education sector in terms of education and research. So I ask him in the spirit of collegiality and in terms of the areas he's committed to and the areas in which Scottish Labour could work with us, instead of pandering to reform, as they too often do on the question of migration and our relationship with the EU, will he work with us ahead of that bill on Friday so that we can find some common cause to help the higher education sector?
Mr Speaker, again, complete denial about the problems in the higher education sector, which has devolved to the Scottish Government. We've made clear that the immigration system we inherited from the previous government is not working, that net migration is too high, that the interaction between migration and skills in the labour market is broken. Therefore, confidence in the whole system needs to be rebuilt. There's work underway in Government to link the work of Skills England and their equivalents, the Migration Advisory Committee, the Industrial Strategy Council and the Department for Work and Pensions to form a new framework to identify sectors that either do or do not have the adequate workforce required and the workforce strategies in terms of skills for workforce of the future. There's been over-reliance on international recruitment, and we have lots and lots of 1 in 6 young people in Scotland, nearly 1 in 6 young people in Scotland neither in education, employment or training. That is a shambles and should be Scotland's shame, and we need to do something about it.
Clive Jones.
Question number 2, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, may I start by commending the honourable member for the consistent attention he's paid to this issue since he was elected last year and the education he has brought to all of us on it. Cancer remains Scotland's biggest killer, with Cancer Research UK reporting that Scots are receiving worse cancer treatment than their neighbours in other parts of the UK. The National Cancer Plan for England will save lives otherwise lost to cancer and deliver improved care and patient experience. Last year, a UK Labour budget delivered the biggest settlement for Scottish public services in the whole history of devolution. It's time for the Scottish Government to step up and get serious about cancer.
Pat Jones.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the Minister for her reply and her very kind remarks. Not a single NHS board in Scotland is meeting the 62-day cancer waiting time standard, just like in Wales and in England. It is a legacy of underinvestment from the SNP in Scotland, from Labour in Wales and from the Conservatives in England. We need proper funding into cancer services to develop change to save lives. How will the Secretary of State for Scotland ensure his colleagues at the Department of Health understand the importance of fully funding cancer strategies to avoid disasters like that devised by the SNP?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, let me reassure the honourable member this is a priority for the Government. But as healthcare is a devolved matter, the Scottish Government is responsible for its own cancer strategies, including diagnostic services in Scotland. But in England, improving early diagnosis of cancer, including breast cancer, is a priority for the UK Government. This Government is committed to transforming diagnostic services in England and will support the NHS to increase capacity to meet the demand for diagnostic services through investment in new capacity, including MRI and CT scanners.
Katrina Murray.
Mr Speaker, my constituent Stephen found out he had prostate cancer almost by accident when he was treated for something else. Thankfully, it was diagnosed early and he's on his way to a good outcome. Despite the fact that prostate cancer is the most common cancer for men in Scotland, it was not one of the tumour types which has been promoted for early diagnosis in the current Scottish Government cancer strategy. Will the Minister encourage the Scottish Government to make specific reference to prostate cancer when it's promoting early diagnosis?
Mr Speaker, let me commend my honourable friend for her commitment to her constituents and pass on the best wishes of the whole House to Stephen with his recovery. Her constituents, like mine, are constantly on the receiving end of late diagnoses because of the underfunding of cancer services that my honourable friend opposite has mentioned. We will, of course, continue to raise this with the Scottish Government as part of our ongoing commitment to deal with Scotland's biggest killer, which is cancer.
Irene Campbell.
Question number 3, please, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, thanks to the Barnett Formula, a Labour Chancellor and 37 Scottish Labour MPs, Scotland's public services have received the biggest ever financial settlement from the UK Government. But how have the SNP spent it? Well, despite the best efforts of our extraordinary NHS staff, every week thousands of Scots will wait more than 8 hours in A&E, and more than 100,000 Scots have been stuck on an NHS waiting list for over a year. Doctors, nurses and, most of all, Scottish patients have been failed by 18 years of SNP mismanagement. We desperately need a new direction.
Mr Speaker, there's been a noticeable increase in the number of people contacting my office about accessing GP services. Long waiting times for hospital appointments and operations. And if you live in the Isle of Arran and you actually get an appointment, quite often you can't get there because you can't get a ferry there and back to your appointment on the same day, which is a different point. However, as a former manager in the NHS, I've seen the consequences of the shortage of GPs in Scotland. There's been a recent successful recruitment campaign in England and in different parts of England. Does the Minister agree with me that it's time for the Scottish Government to utilise the Barnett consequentials in order to improve access to NHS services in Scotland through robust workforce planning and to follow the example of the NHS in England and get GPs successfully recruited?
Mr Speaker, let me thank my honourable friend not just for her service to her constituents, but her previous service in the NHS. As she has noted, in England, thanks to Labour, NHS waiting lists have fallen month on month because this government has a plan and we have invested. But as my honourable friend sadly points out, it is a completely different story in Scotland, where her constituents, like mine, see a situation where almost 1 in 6 people are now stuck on a waiting list. John Swinney has announced this SNP government's 5th NHS recovery plan in less than 4 years. But patients and staff know it's not good enough, and we need a new direction.
Seamus Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister speaks of the wonderful NHS staff that we have, and she's right. But she also speaks of a new direction that's required. Let me give you a clue as to what the possible new direction might be that you're speaking of. The Good Law Project revealed this month that more than 60% of donations to Labour's Health Secretary, totalling £372,000, came from individuals and companies linked to the private healthcare sector. So, as the same Labour Health Secretary is so fond of saying, all roads lead to Westminster, including NHS funding. So, with cuts to public services coming down the line, is the Secretary of State or the Minister worried about the influence of private health donors on his Cabinet colleagues?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman says there have been cuts to public services. Let me put on record once again. This Labour government pledged to end austerity, and we have, with a record settlement for Scotland's public services. Money that has been squandered by the SNP government, such that we are still in a situation where nearly 1 in 6 Scots are on a waiting list, whereas south of the border, waiting lists have fallen for the 5th month in a row. That's the difference a Labour government with a plan and willingness to fund it makes.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Question number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 4 and 15 together. I'm proud of the enormous contribution North Sea workers have made to our country, and that oil and gas will be an important part of our energy mix for decades to come. We have a workforce that leads the world, and we are determined to secure the long-term future in the energy industry, including oil and gas. The UK Government will soon respond to our recent consultation on supporting the energy transition in the North Sea, and I'm in the North East tomorrow, turning on a wind farm and also meeting leaders in the oil and gas sector.
Sir Ashley.
Mr. Speaker, if the UK achieves net zero in 2050, we will still consume about 14 billion barrels of oil and gas a year. We are currently on track to produce 4 billion barrels a year. Will the Secretary of State explain why he prefers to import our energy than produce it ourselves?
Mr. Speaker, our national mission of this Labour government is to get to clean power by 2030, but that means 3 things. It means renewable power, it means nuclear power, and it also means oil and gas. As I've said already, oil and gas will be with us in the Scottish and UK context for decades to come.
Harriet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A recent report by Offshore Energies UK showed that if the UK oil and gas basin was continued to be used until 2050, it could produce half of our oil and gas needs. That would do wonders for jobs in the North East of Scotland, the North East economy, our energy security, the energy transition, and it would also bring in £12 billion to the Treasury. On top of that, it would also bring in £150 billion of economic growth to the UK, which I'm sure everyone in this House and the Government would welcome. So will the Secretary of State please have a word with the Energy Secretary and ask him to stop his policies which are continuing to ruin our oil and gas sector and for once back North East Scotland?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady mentions the oil and gas sector in 2050, and I've already mentioned at this dispatch, as is the Secretary of State, Des Nez, that oil and gas will be with us for decades to come, including to 2050.
Gilbert.
Mr. Speaker, does my right honourable friend agree with me that there's an opportunity for significant economic growth in Scotland from getting a just transition from oil and gas to clean power right? In my Edinburgh North and Leith constituency at the Port of Leith, you can see the land and space previously used for oil and gas sector has been transformed by investment from Forth Ports to the largest renewable hub in Scotland. Will he join with me in welcoming this investment in Leith and outline how his department will help secure every job possible in the transition from oil and gas?
Mr. Speaker, can I commend my honourable friend for the work that she's doing, particularly in her constituency in the Port of Leith, to make sure we can have the transition and have it well. But what she highlights is the important thing about this particular issue and debate, that the energy mix requires us to have renewable power and clean energy by 2030, but it also requires us to have nuclear power, and it also requires us to have oil and gas. The energy mix means we do it all. It's not either or.
Gregor Poynton.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Secretary of State rightly outlines how important oil and gas sector is to Scotland and to the workers and businesses rely on it. But if we are to have a truly just transition, we need to invest in new technologies like hydrogen now. And therefore, will he join me in welcoming the shortlisting of the Selmsmuir hydrogen project in the Livingston constituency? It's been shortlisted for UK government support, and can outline how this will benefit the Livingston constituency.
Mr Speaker, on the 7th of April, the UK Government announced the 8th Scottish project had been shortlisted for the next stage of the HAR2 process. I and my ministerial colleagues look forward to working with industry to deliver a vision for a thriving low-carbon hydrogen economy in the UK, and of course commend my honourable friend for the work that he's done in pushing forward the project in his Livingston constituency.
Chair Secretary of State Andrew Barr.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, can I ask the Secretary of State, does he agree with the Scottish Labour leader who says that there is no question it has to be new oil and gas? Or does he agree with his colleague, the Energy Secretary, who's banned new licences in the North Sea and is overseeing an accelerated decline of the UK's oil and gas basin?
Mr Speaker, there's obviously a consultation on the just transition happening with the Department at the moment in terms of the Secretary of State that he refers to, but I just go back to my previous answers. In order to get to clean power by 2030, in order for us to have an energy mix in this country, you require oil and gas, you require renewables and you require nuclear. It's a simple process.
Goodbye.
Well, I think we all heard there, and I'm sure Anas Sarwar certainly heard there. He was unable to agree with his own leader in Scotland. So in hawk to the UK Labour Party, they can't stand up for Scottish workers or its oil and gas industry, and can't even agree with their own leader in Scotland. It's always been the party interest over the national interest with Labour, and no notice taken of its Scottish Labour Party. 10 years ago, the Scottish Labour Party was described by its own leader at the time as simply being the branch office. Nothing has changed, has it?
Mr Speaker, the sole purpose of this government initially in the first few months was to clean up the mess that his government left of this country, which included the £22 billion black hole. We'll get on with delivering our missions, including clean power, by 2030. That's what we're focused on, because that's what's good for jobs, good for bills and good for the environment.
Robin Swan.
Question number 5, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, under the Windsor Framework, the Northern Ireland Plant Health Label allows growers and traders to move plants and seeds for planting from Great Britain to Northern Ireland without a phytosanitary certificate, and Scottish businesses have benefited from this. For example, more than 1,500 tonnes of previously prohibited seed potatoes have moved to Northern Ireland from Great Britain last year, mostly from Scottish traders.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The Minister will know that McIntyre's fruit and plant in Scotland has actually said that it's easier to supply Japan than it is to send plants to Coleman's Nurseries in my constituency in South Antrim. And the same company has now seen orders cancelled in Northern Ireland. At the weekend, Ewing Seafoods, Northern Ireland's oldest fishmonger, had a 40-foot container filled with hundreds of thousands of pounds of fresh fish returned from Belfast to Scotland due to administrative paperwork errors on 7 boxes. So will the Minister or Secretary of State meet with me in representation of those companies to see what can be done to ease what is a bureaucratic burden on Northern Ireland business and Scottish business?
Mr Speaker, I'd be delighted to meet with the honourable gentleman, but let me reassure him the Horticultural Working Group, co-chaired by senior officials from DEFRA and the Cabinet Office, has been set up specifically to tackle issues around movement of seeds to consumers in Northern Ireland as a first priority. I know he's mentioned other topics too, and I'm very happy to meet with him on them. That group meets regularly to address issues and includes representatives of the Ulster Farmers Union, the National Farmers Union and the Horticultural Trades Association. Business leaders, as well as a small number of other horticultural businesses, also sit on that working group. I'd be delighted to discuss this further with him.
Chris Kane.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Scotland produces world-class potatoes that supply our iconic fish and chip shops, like the Real Food Cafe and the Green Welly stop in Tyndrum, Vincenzo's in Stirling, whose fish supper won an award last year, and Corrieri's in Causeway Head, where Robert and Peter Corrieri retire this year after decades of service. Will the Minister recognise their value to our local economies and say what more can be done to support the supply chains linking Scottish growers to these much-loved businesses?
Mr Speaker, my honourable friend will be aware that potatoes are, of course, a staple of our national dish, haggis, neeps and tatties. They're a staple of my favourite breakfast, the dry potato scone. I'm delighted to join him in recognising all of the fish and chip shops in his constituency, and I'd be delighted to accept invitations for a fish and chip shop tour from any of my colleagues across the House to recognise their vital contribution.
David Mundell.
Number 6, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, I'm sure that wasn't for me. We know that this will be a concerning time for businesses. In Scotland in 2024, 12.3% of goods exported from Scotland were to the US. That is why the UK Government is focused on negotiating an economic deal with the US. As the Business and Trade Secretary made clear in his statement to this House on the 3rd of April, the Government is resolute in our support for industries across the whole of the UK, and ministers and officials will continue to engage with the businesses to understand the impact that these tariffs may have.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I associate myself with the comments on Pope Francis and indeed Christina McKelvey, and wish you, Mr Speaker, a happy St George's Day. It's very important that we all celebrate our national identities but still come together as one united kingdom. I hope that the Secretary of State and I were not too optimistic in our last exchange on trade with the US when we hoped that the Trump administration would actually be a boost for Scottish business in the United States. Can he tell us specifically, though, what he's doing in terms of the UK discussions with the United States to ensure that specific Scottish interests, like the whisky industry, are part of those arrangements?
Yes. Thank you, Mr Speaker. As I've said at this dispatch box before, it's vital we do all we can to strengthen our diplomatic, cultural and business ties with the United States. I was in Washington and New York for Tartan Week on the week that tariffs were imposed on the rest of the world, and made the case for Scotch whisky and Scottish businesses in particular. We're engaging with Scottish exporters and industry representatives to assess the potential impact of US tariffs and remain in contact with US counterparts. Our pragmatic and calm approach has been overwhelmingly welcomed by business and industry. We will not conduct this important issue in a knee-jerk way to get retweets like some others in this House.
Liz McAllister.
Mr Speaker, will the Secretary of State join with me in welcoming the pragmatic and calm approach of our Prime Minister on this issue, in the clear interests of businesses and consumers, and in contrast to those on the opposite benches who seem only interested in social media and quick headlines?
I couldn't agree with my honourable friend more. The pragmatic approach from the Prime Minister and this Government in terms of this issue has been welcomed by industry and businesses right across the United Kingdom. That is in the national interest of the United Kingdom to do so, and we work very hard together to make sure the impact of US tariffs on the UK are not as bad as we thought they might be.
We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Steve Darling.
Question 1.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, the entire House will join me in paying tribute to His Holiness Pope Francis, an extraordinary man. His lifelong work on fairness will leave a lasting legacy, and people of all backgrounds and beliefs were inspired by his humility and his compassion. And I think the outpouring of grief and love that we've seen in the last 2 days or so shows the respect and admiration that we've held in around the world. Mr Speaker, I will attend his funeral on Saturday and pay tribute to his courage and to his leadership.